Hi, I've waited 20 years to say this out loud. My name is Elara Vance, and at 39, I never thought I'd come back to the house that tried to erase me. It should have been a quiet homecoming, just me, my old Navy duffel, and memories too heavy to carry. But instead, it became the first day of war. My brother's voice was the first thing I heard. Elara's finally here to claim what's not hers. He was waiting, smiling, armed with lawyers, lies, and a smear campaign ready to launch. And Aunt Lisa? She just watched. Before I tell you what I found buried in my father's files, tap that subscribe button if you've ever had to prove yourself to people who were supposed to protect you. Each like is a reminder that truth still matters, and that stories like mine don't go unheard. Because what happened next? It changed everything. The wind off the Atlantic had a bite that no amount of nostalgia could soften. I stood at the foot of the Vance estate's porch, staring at the warped floorboards like they might splinter under the weight of who I'd become. 20 years of Navy discipline packed into one duffel slung over my shoulder. 20 years of running, not just from home, but from everything it meant. The screen door creaked as I pushed it open, that same groan it gave when I used to sneak out past curfew. Inside, the air smelled of sea salt, old varnish, and something else, something like dust-covered memories and betrayal. My boots echoed across the hardwood. I paused beneath the faded family photo in the hallway, Torin's smug grin anchoring the center, Aunt Lisa's forced smile, my younger self squeezed in on the edge like an afterthought. The glass was smudged, but I didn't wipe it. Was this a mistake? The house didn't look empty, but it felt it. The furniture hadn't changed, but everything else had. Or maybe it was me. I didn't expect a homecoming, but I didn't expect a war either. A floorboard creaked overhead. I stiffened. Then I heard his voice. Elara's finally here to claim what's not hers. Torin. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded prepared, like he'd been rehearsing this line. I stood still for a beat, hand grazing the banister. My throat tightened, not from fear, but recognition, the way a wound remembers being cut. Every part of this house whispered memory, but none louder than him. I stepped into the front room. It still had Dad's old recliner, reupholstered, probably by Aunt Lisa. The mantel was lined with dusty trophies, his, never mine. There was a time I'd have killed for a scrap of pride from this place. Now I just wanted truth. You look thinner, Torin said, emerging from the kitchen. He didn't smile. They feed you in the Navy or just teach you how to sneak back into places you don't belong? His words hit like stones, deliberately casual, sharp underneath. I didn't answer, not right away. My eyes scanned the room behind him. No Aunt Lisa, yet. Still the same house, I said. Still smells like old fish and older lies. He chuckled, one dry note. You always were dramatic. I set my bag down, slow. Let him see I wasn't rattled. I came for Dad's will, I said. Not a fight. Torin leaned against the counter, arms crossed, looking too at ease. Too late. You opened that door. Something inside me, that part that had kept rank and order for 2 decades, shifted. He wasn't angry I'd returned. He was ready. The silence stretched. I heard it then, the muffled shuffle of someone else behind the kitchen wall. My fingers twitched. Aunt Lisa? A lawyer? I took a step forward. Don't, Torin warned, voice low now. Just don't act like you belong here, Elara. You left. We moved on. I looked him dead in the eyes. I didn't come to belong. I came to finish what Dad started. He flinched, just slightly, but enough. And that's when I knew there was more to this than resentment. There was fear. What was he afraid I'd find? I turned toward the hallway. Every picture, every dent in the wall felt like a breadcrumb I hadn't followed when I should have. My hand grazed the edge of the door frame where Dad used to mark our heights each birthday. The marks were still there. Torin's line always higher, darker, more deliberate. Mine, faint, forgotten. And yet, I'd been the one he wrote to before he died. Torin's voice followed me down the hall. You're not getting the house, or the land, or a dime of what's left. Walk away now, Elara, before it gets ugly. I stopped at Dad's study. The door was closed, just like the last time I saw it. I placed my hand on the knob, heart thudding slow and heavy. Why does my own brother sound like an enemy? I stood outside Dad's study for what felt like minutes, fingers hovering over the doorknob, heart quietly knocking beneath my ribs. The wood was cold, lacquer cracked with age. I didn't open it, not yet. Some doors ask to stay closed until you're ready for what waits behind them. Instead, I stepped back into the hallway, eyes drifting again to that family photo. I stared at Torin's grin, the kind of smile that always felt a little too rehearsed. The longer I looked, the more it made my stomach twist. The memories didn't ask permission. They never did. Suddenly, I was 12 again. Summer sun burning the back of my neck, the salt sticking to my skin as I stood barefoot on Dad's old boat. Torin was beside me, tackle box at his feet, a can of soda tucked in the crook of his elbow. His laughter rang out as he reeled in a striped bass, then turned to me with that same damn grin. "You catch nothing again?" he teased. "I'm not done yet," I shot back, stubborn and sunburned. But when I nearly dropped my rod trying to untangle a knot, he stepped in, wordlessly fixing it with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing this longer. "Don't worry, I got your back," he said, not looking at me. And I believed him. Back then, I would have followed him anywhere. That version of us, the kids with sun in their hair and salt on their skin, felt like strangers now. I blinked, and the memory dissolved like mist over the ocean. In its place, another one crept in, colder, sharper, Torin at 17. His voice raised, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the glass. Dad's voice, low but firm, following after him. "You don't get to rewrite the will, Torin. I won't have you poisoning the family over money. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who deserves it." I had watched from the staircase, clutching the banister. Torin caught sight of me and sneered. "Go play soldier, Elara. This house was never yours." That fight had ended with Torin storming off into the night. I remembered Dad sitting alone at the kitchen table after, scribbling something on a yellowed envelope. He looked up at me, tired. "Some things you only understand too late," he'd murmured. I never asked what he meant. Now I wondered if that envelope still existed somewhere in this house. I stepped into the living room and sank onto the couch, the same one where we used to huddle during storms. The fabric was rougher now, the cushions lopsided. A breeze slipped through the window pane cracks, making the curtains flutter like nervous hands. A soft creak. I turned. Aunt Lysa stood in the hallway, one hand curled around the edge of the doorframe like she needed it for balance. "Elara," she said. Not warm, not cold, just distant. I straightened but stayed seated. "Still smells like his aftershave in here," I said. "Ocean moss and stubbornness." She smiled faintly, barely. "He always wore too much." Silence settled between us. Then she sat across from me, hands folded in her lap, like she was bracing for something. Her eyes, pale and watery, didn't quite meet mine. "He left me a letter," I said, "before he passed." Her expression didn't change, but her fingers flexed slightly, like something inside her had flinched. "Did he say anything about Torin?" I pressed. She hesitated. "Only that he hoped you'd come home." That didn't sound like Dad. That sounded like evasion. I leaned in. "You knew about their fight, didn't you? About the will." "I don't want to get involved," she said quietly. "You already are." Her jaw tensed, and she rose. "This family's been through enough, Elara. Don't dig things up that were meant to stay buried." But I couldn't unhear what she didn't say. She's hiding something. As she left the room, her footfalls faded like guilt down the hallway. I sat there, trying to still the tremor in my knee. Something wasn't right, not just with Torin, with all of it. I stood and moved toward the old bookshelf. Some of Dad's Navy books still sat there, spines cracked, pages yellowing. I pulled one out at random, a naval code manual from 1972. Dust floated up in lazy spirals. Something slid out from between the pages. A letter, folded once, creased and faintly stained with coffee. My breath caught as I opened it, but it wasn't the will. It wasn't even addressed to me. It was a list. 3 names, bank names, transfer codes. The ink was smudged, but one name was legible. Torin V. Creed. I stared at it, heart pounding. Why would Dad hide something like this? Before I could process more, the front door slammed. Torin's voice, louder this time. "You going through his things now?" he barked from the entryway. I stuffed the paper into my back pocket and turned just as he walked into the room, eyes blazing. "He trusted me," he snapped. "Not you. You ran away the first chance you got." "I served," I said calmly. "You schemed. You abandoned us." I stepped forward, voice low but steady. "Is that why you're trying to erase me from the will? Because Dad finally saw through you?" His lip curled. "You want to fight? You'll get it." He turned and stormed out again, but not before muttering under his breath, "You were always the weak one." I stood alone, fingers pressed to my jeans where the paper crinkled like a secret refusing to stay hidden. I had proof now. Or maybe bait. Either way, it wasn't just grief driving this anymore. It was the feeling I'd missed something back then, something Dad tried to warn me about. Too late. And now, that warning was starting to echo louder. The morning fog rolled in from the Atlantic like a veil, thick and gray, swallowing the coastline and curling beneath the windowsills. I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, steam rising from lukewarm coffee I hadn't touched. The silence in the house had weight, like the air was waiting for something to snap. It didn't wait long. The door banged open. Torin's boots struck the floor like a metronome of menace. He didn't knock. Of course he didn't. He walked into Dad's house like it had always belonged to him. Behind him trailed a man in a stiff gray suit, briefcase clutched like a weapon. I didn't recognize him, but I didn't need to. The leather folder in his hand screamed what was coming. Torin dropped a thick stack of papers onto the kitchen table. They slid across the wood, grazing the edge of my coffee mug. "Sign it," he said. I stared at the papers, then at him. "What is this?" "Legal notice," the man in the suit offered dryly. "Transfer of estate ownership. Your brother has initiated a claim to the property." I laughed, a short, brittle sound. "This house was left to both of us." "Not anymore," Torin said, smug. "There's a clause. You left. You forfeited." I kept my hands in my lap. If I reached for those papers, I might tear them apart. "I served," I said, my voice low. "I didn't vanish, and Dad never rescinded my share." Torin leaned closer, hands braced on the table. "Do you have the paperwork to prove that?" My heart thudded. Do I? The truth was, I didn't know. Dad's death was so sudden. We'd barely reconnected before the cancer took him. If there had been updates to the will, they weren't in my hands. But Torin was betting I'd flinch. I didn't. "You don't scare me," I said, "and you don't own this house." The man beside him opened the briefcase and pulled out a copy of Dad's original will, or what looked like it, and slid it toward me. "It's all above board," Torin added. "Unless, of course, you'd rather take this to court." He wanted a scene. He wanted me on the defensive. But something about his tone, the careful confidence, made me pause. He wasn't just trying to scare me. He was sure of something. I stood, slow. "Give me a day. I'll have my lawyer look at it." "You don't have a lawyer," he smirked. "Then I'll get one." He held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded to the man in the suit. "Let's go." When the door clicked shut behind them, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My fingers shook as I reached for the papers. The font was sharp, the language legal and cold. But the part that caught my eye was the date, dated 2 months before Dad's death, and stamped with a notary from a town Dad hadn't visited in years. Forged? My gut said yes, but I needed more than instinct. I turned and nearly jumped. Aunt Lysa stood at the doorway, wringing her hands. "I heard," she said softly. "How long have you known?" She avoided my eyes. "Torin said he had everything under control." "That's not an answer." Her shoulders sagged. "He's just trying to protect what's his." "Is that what you think this is?" She didn't reply. I took a step forward. "Why didn't you stop him?" "I don't have a say, Elara. I never did." I shook my head. "No, you chose not to have one." She turned away then, disappearing down the hall. I didn't follow. Instead, I sat back down, stared at the table, and felt the familiar burn of helplessness rise in my throat. But just as quickly, I swallowed it. This wasn't about feelings anymore. It was about facts, the will, the forged location, the way Torin had already prepared legal counsel before I even unpacked my bag. He was playing chess, not checkers. I needed to catch up. But first, I needed to look at my records. I went to my duffel, pulling out the folder I'd brought back with me. It held everything I thought I might need: discharge papers, old photos, Dad's final letter, and my Navy record. Except when I opened it, my breath hitched. The document inside looked wrong. Slightly off-center logo, font too crisp. The seal, faintly faded, like it had been photocopied too many times. No, 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 no. I flipped to the second page. There, at the bottom, was a stamp I'd never seen before. Status, unverified. I sank onto the bed. My record, my identity. What the hell had he done? The weight in my chest spread like a bruise. Had Torin gone that far? Had he planted this? Was that even possible? I stared at the pages, my mind spiraling. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I'd grabbed the wrong file in the rush to leave the base. No, this was deliberate. Torin had anticipated my return. He hadn't just challenged the will. He'd come for me, my credibility, my name. My blood started to boil. This wasn't a petty inheritance squabble. This was war. I paced the room, fists clenched, the edges of the record crumpling in my grip. And then, as if the universe hadn't had its fill, my phone buzzed. No caller ID. I almost let it ring out, but something in me, that same gut that always knew when to duck on a ship's deck just before the blast, told me to answer. Hello? Silence. Then a click. A voice. Low. Distorted. You're not safe, Elara. They're watching everything. Then the line went dead. I stood there, heart hammering, phone still pressed to my ear. They? And just like that, I wasn't sure who the real enemy was anymore. The sun had already started to set when I heard the front door slam again. That sound was beginning to feel like punctuation, Torin's way of announcing himself without saying a word. I stood in the hallway, spine straight, hands loose at my sides. My body was calm, but my thoughts churned beneath the surface like water before a storm. He stepped into view, smug and sharp in a pressed blazer that didn't belong in this house. He looked like the version of himself he'd always wanted to be, the businessman, the heir, the man in charge, not the boy who once cried when Dad refused to let him sail the boat alone. You going somewhere? He asked, eyeing the keys I'd tossed on the entryway table. Just clearing my head. He laughed, short and shallow. Not much left to clear. I didn't respond. Torin leaned against the banister, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm on the rail. The silence between us thickened. You really think you're going to win this? He asked. I don't think anything. I know you're lying. You keep saying that like it's going to change something. I walked past him into the dining room. The table was still covered in the same yellowing lace cloth from years ago, stained in one corner with red wine I'd spilled at Thanksgiving when I was 16, back when family meant food and music and mild bickering, not legal battles and forged papers. He followed me in. You know what the town thinks? He said, voice lower now. They think you made it all up, your Navy story, your medals, everything. I turned slowly, locking eyes with him. You're spreading that? He shrugged. I don't have to. People believe what they want to believe. That hit harder than I let him see. My fingers tightened around the edge of the chair I hadn't realized I was holding. The same chair Dad used to sit in during family dinners. You're delusional, Torin, I said. He stepped forward. I'm practical. There's a difference. The air between us crackled. I could feel the tension in my chest, pushing against my ribs like a held breath that had gone too long. Then I heard her voice. He's just protecting us, Aunt Lisa said, emerging from the hallway. My heart sank. She stood beside Torin, arms crossed, not meeting my gaze. Aunt Lisa, you saw Dad's will. You know this isn't what he wanted. I saw a lot of things, she said softly. I also saw how hurt your brother was when you left. I left to serve. And he stayed. He kept the family together. The words stung, not because they were true, but because she believed them. Torin smiled slightly, victory on his face. He pulled a folder from his bag and laid it on the table between us. What now? I asked, not reaching for it. Proof, he said. Dad disowned you, in writing. My pulse quickened. I didn't move. You expect me to believe this after everything? Believe what you want, he said, nudging the folder toward me. But it's notarized, stamped, dated. My hands itched to grab it, to rip it apart, but I didn't. Instead, I sat slowly, eyes never leaving his. "You're forging Dad's name now?" I asked. "Careful," he said, voice cold. "That's defamation." My jaw clenched. I reached for the folder with steady fingers, flipping it open. It looked real, everything lined up, even the handwriting. But something was wrong. I scanned the bottom corner and saw it. The notary stamp. Same town, same office, same person as the last document he brought. Too perfect, too convenient. "Who paid for this?" I asked. Torin said nothing. Beside him, Aunt Lisa finally sat, her hands clasped tight. She looked at me, but not like family, more like a stranger trying to read a language she'd forgotten. "You really think Dad would disown me?" I asked her, voice quieter now. "I think he was scared." "Of what?" "Of what you'd bring back with you." That hit me like a gut punch. I stood too fast. The chair screeched across the floor. "That's not fear," I said.
"That's guilt." Torin stepped closer. "You think you're the victim here? Dad gave up on you long before I did." I turned to leave. "Elara," Lisa said, voice trembling, "this isn't worth tearing us apart." I stopped in the doorway. "You should have thought of that before helping him tear up the truth." I went upstairs, my legs heavy with fury. In my old bedroom, I shut the door and locked it. My breath came fast. My hands trembled. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there, letting the lies settle like dust on my skin. Then I grabbed my phone and took a picture of the forged document. If they wanted a paper war, I'd fight with fire. A buzz on the screen broke my thoughts. A new message. No name, no number, just 4 words. "Meet me, midnight, pier." I stared at it, heart pounding. Who? Before I could respond, the screen went dark. I sat on the edge of the bed, chest heaving. Nothing made sense. Not yet. But something was shifting, and I was done playing nice. The fog had thickened again by the time I reached the edge of town. Headlights blurred into soft glows, and the wet pavement shimmered like it remembered the last storm. Midnight had come and gone. Whoever sent the text hadn't shown. Maybe they'd watched from the shadows. Maybe they were never real. But by morning, someone else made sure I knew they were. I woke to the shrill buzz of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. Dozens of notifications, missed calls, headlines. I rubbed my eyes and unlocked the screen. Ex-Navy fraud exposed by brother. Vance family torn apart. My chest tightened. I scrolled through the local news site. There it was. My photo. One Torin must have dug up from some old service file. Under a bold headline, framed by an article full of insinuations. Questions about my discharge. Claims about falsified records. Whispers of fraud. Torin's face sat smug at the center of it all. He'd given them a statement. Of course he had. "We just want the truth," he'd told reporters. "My sister's claims about her service and about our father's will don't match the facts. It's heartbreaking." Heartbreaking. I stared at the word like it might combust if I glared hard enough. I shoved the covers off and stood, heart racing. The room spun for a second. Too fast, too loud, too much. This can't be happening. But it was. And he wasn't just playing dirty. He was burning everything down. I dressed in silence, jeans, hoodie, ball cap low. I needed to disappear for a while. Not to run, but to think. Outside, the wind had picked up. A nor'easter was coming, the kind that made the sea groan against the cliffs and bent pine trees sideways. It matched my mood, raw, unsteady, full of threat. The first person I passed on Main Street didn't look at me. The second did. A quick glance, then averted eyes. The third whispered something to her companion. I didn't catch it, but I didn't have to. The town had made up its mind. My boots hit the sidewalk harder than I meant. The tension in my jaw refused to let go. Every step felt like I was dragging my name behind me, like a broken anchor. I ducked into the old cafe near the harbor, the one Dad used to take me to when I was little. The bell over the door jingled like it always had, but the warmth I remembered was gone. The barista's smile froze the second she recognized me. I ordered coffee. Black. No small talk. At the table in the back, I slid into the booth and tried to breathe. The smell of cinnamon rolls and burnt espresso filled the air. A memory tugged. Dad blowing across a hot cup, saying, "Sometimes the town's just small enough to forget you." until they don't. He was right. Again. I stared out the window, rain beginning to tap gently against the glass. Then I noticed the envelope. It had been slipped across the table while I wasn't looking. Plain, unmarked. I looked around. No one was watching me. Or maybe everyone was, and I just couldn't tell the difference anymore. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. Just 5 words. You're not alone. Stay sharp. No name, no return address. But I knew somehow it wasn't Torin. A wave of something colder than the wind passed through me. A warning? A lifeline? I folded the paper and tucked it into my coat pocket. My hands were still shaking. Across the street, a local paperboy taped another copy of the front page to the window. I got up, walked outside, stared at it. Torin's words bold and loud under my photo again. This time I noticed the quote beneath it. If she's innocent, why not prove it? I pressed my fingers to the glass. Cold, smooth, fragile. He knows I can't prove it. Not without the originals, not without help, not without Dad. But Dad was gone. I turned, only to catch a reflection behind me, someone watching from a parked sedan across the street. The car pulled away when I looked directly at it. I was being watched. I headed home, wind slashing at my coat. My steps quickened. Every corner now felt like a setup, every glance a question. At the house I found another note. This one slid under the door. He forged more than the will. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten. Rushed, messy, familiar. I read it 3 times. Whoever this is, they know things. And they want me to know too. But why now? Why not before the story broke? Why not when Torin started twisting the knife? Unless they were part of it, and something changed. The wind howled outside, windows rattled, the storm was getting closer. So was something else. I grabbed my phone. No new messages, no calls. I looked again at the news article, scrolled to the comments, hundreds, some calling me a hero, most calling me a liar. Then a new one popped up. You should have stayed gone. My blood chilled. I turned off the phone and stood in the dark. They're everywhere, and I'm running out of time. But I wasn't going to crawl. Not now. Not when someone out there still believed me. The fog came back heavier that night, curling over the harbor like smoke from a fire no one could see. I stood at the end of the dock near Camden Pier, the boards slick with mist and age, the water beneath them black and endless. I'd been waiting for 20 minutes, no movement, no voice, just the creak of ropes from moored boats and the occasional distant clang of a buoy. Then came footsteps. I turned sharply, body on edge, breath held. From the shadows stepped Jorah. I blinked, unsure. He hadn't spoken to me in years, not since Dad's funeral. His face looked older somehow, not from time, but from weight. Regret, maybe. Did you send the notes? I asked. He didn't answer right away, just stepped closer, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. I shouldn't be here, he muttered. You already are. He glanced behind him, as if someone might be watching. Then his hand emerged, trembling slightly, holding something small. A USB drive. He pressed it into my palm like it burned. Torin's hiding things, he said, voice low, almost cracked. More than the will, more than the military stuff. I stared at the flash drive. It felt too light for how heavy everything suddenly became. What's on it? I asked. Bank statements, transfers, fake charities, offshore accounts under your name. My stomach dropped. He's laundering through me? Jorah nodded once. I clenched my hand around the drive. It felt like the only solid thing in the universe. Why now? I asked. Why help me? His jaw tensed. Because I didn't know how far he'd go. I thought it was just inheritance games. But this... He shook his head, stepping back like the guilt was radioactive. You were there, Jorah, when Dad died. You could have warned me. I didn't know, he said quietly. Not all of it. Not until last month. And by then he had people watching me. A gust of wind whipped past us, carrying the salty sting of the sea. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. Torin knows you took this? I asked. No, I copied it from the external server he keeps at the office, but once he finds out it's missing... His words trailed off. We both knew what that meant. You need to go, he added. And do what? Pretend this didn't happen? No, he said, finally looking me in the eye. Use it. Burn him down. Just don't tell anyone where it came from. He turned to leave, but I reached out, grabbing his arm. One more thing. Why fake my military records? He swallowed hard. Because it was the only way to discredit you. He said if you were out of the way legally, everything else would fall into place. The will, the land, the legacy. My grip tightened. And you were okay with that? He shook his head. I wasn't, but I didn't stop it either. He pulled his arm free and disappeared into the fog. I stood there a moment longer, the USB now a burning brand in my pocket. On the walk home, I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every passing car felt like a threat. Every flicker of a street lamp overhead made me flinch. The air was heavier now, like the whole town was watching and waiting for me to make one wrong move. Back inside the estate, I bolted the door and pulled every shade closed. Then I sat at the old desk in Dad's study, shoved aside the scattered legal threats and forged wills, and plugged the USB into my laptop. A soft chime, a folder blinked open, and there it was. Line after line of wire transfers from our family's charity fund, dates, amounts, shell organizations, most traced back to an account in the Cayman Islands, all under my name. It was a trap, elaborate, precise, and brutal. I scrolled further and saw names I didn't expect, local town officials, donors, even someone from the courthouse. My pulse spiked. Torin had built an entire world of lies, using me as the foundation, and if this got out of control, I'd be the one dragged down first. I clicked into one last file, a spreadsheet titled Final. In it, notes on press timing, lawyer coordination, and a timeline for public exposure. The smear campaign wasn't spontaneous. It had been scheduled, managed. I leaned back, breath caught halfway in my chest. He planned everything. The moment I stepped foot back in this town, the wheels had already been turning, and I hadn't seen it. The screen went dark. My reflection stared back, tired eyes, clenched jaw, every muscle drawn tight. Then the siren started, faint at first, then closer. Flashing red lights lit up the edge of my curtains. I ducked. The patrol car slowed as it passed, then moved on. I exhaled shakily. This wasn't over. It had just begun. The next morning, the rain hadn't stopped, only grown colder. It clung to the windows like breath on glass, casting the world outside in a permanent haze. I hadn't slept. The USB sat on the desk like a loaded weapon, glowing faintly against the dull blue light of my laptop. I stared at the files again, slower this time. Folder after folder. Donor records, transfers, event planning, and finally, final will. The last one was password protected. Of course it was. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't even try. I didn't have it. Not yet. I leaned back, rubbing my temples, the weight of what I'd uncovered pressing down on my chest like a stone slab. Torin had framed me financially, rigged my reputation, and turned the town against me. And now this. Offshore accounts under my name, each one tying me to a crime I didn't commit. I scrolled through a folder labeled Invoices. A spreadsheet popped open. Dozens of transactions marked as charity expenses. But the vendors? They didn't exist. No websites, no contact info, just P.O. boxes and shell names. Fake, all of it. He didn't just siphon money, he buried it. Through me. I clicked one transaction. A $45,000 equipment donation to something called Arden Group Intel. I Googled it. Nothing. Just a dead site and an address in the Cayman Islands. My stomach twisted. Dad's foundation wasn't just being drained. It was being used as a front, a smokescreen for something bigger. And Torin had been laying this groundwork for years. The betrayal cracked wider in my chest. He hadn't just pushed me out of the family. He'd made me the fall girl. I opened the event planning folder, photos, PDFs, donation forms. But one thing caught my eye, an RSVP list from last year's benefit gala. Judge Holt's name was on it. So was someone from the county records office. Even Aunt Lisa. I swallowed hard. They were all in the same room. I leaned forward, eyes scanning line by line. Then something strange, a line at the very bottom, redacted. The name was erased, replaced with black bars. Who was that? I zoomed in, and under the black, barely visible, a single initial, L. A chill ran through me. Lyra? I shook the thought off. Too soon. Too wild. I needed to focus. I clicked into the final will folder again, still locked. Then I saw a note, a lone Word doc titled Dad's Voice Memo. I clicked. A transcript loaded. If anything happens to me, Elara deserves the truth. I made mistakes, but I tried to correct them. Torin, he's not who he used to be. It ended abruptly. No timestamp, no signature, just silence. I stared at the screen, hands frozen. Dad knew. He knew, and he tried to warn me. A sharp knock at the door shattered the stillness. I froze. Another knock. Louder. I grabbed the USB, yanked it from the laptop, shoved it in my coat pocket, and moved to the peephole. It was Torin, standing in the rain, soaked but smiling. I cracked the door but didn't open it. "You don't answer your phone anymore," he said, water dripping from his collar. "Didn't think we had anything to talk about." His smile didn't falter. "You've been busy, late-night meetings, curious friends." My pulse jumped. "You watching me now?" He shrugged. "You were never good at hiding." I didn't move. Neither did he. "Let me in," he said. "No." "Elara, you come here with another lie, another forged paper, and I swear I came to give you a chance." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small manila envelope, sealed. Dry somehow, even in the downpour. "I won't offer this twice." I opened the door just enough to snatch it from his hand, then slammed it shut. Through the peephole, I saw him hesitate, just for a beat, then turn and walk away. I waited until I couldn't see him anymore. Then I tore the envelope open. Inside, a single typed page, an NDA. If I signed it, I'd get a payout, a clean exit. My name restored in exchange for silence. The numbers weren't small, but the condition was clear. Drop the case. Erase the truth. I dropped the paper on the floor like it was something foul. He thought this was about money? No. This was about what Dad built, what he tried to protect, even when it was too late. And suddenly, the locked file made sense. The password wasn't a code. It was a name. I rushed back to the laptop and typed in the 6 letters, hands shaking. Vance 1, the folder opened. My breath caught. The real will. Signed, dated, notarized from a completely different town than the forged one. Clear as day. Dad left everything to me. Torin had erased it, buried it under fraud and fake charities and forged documents. I stared at the screen, the weight of it almost too much. I have proof. But just as quickly, dread crept in. Now they'll come for me. I reached for my phone. 1 missed call, Jorah, and 1 new text. Court hearing date moved up. They're rushing it. You need to act now. My fingers curled tight around the edge of the desk. Everything was finally out in the open. Now, the real fight began. The courthouse smelled like dust and disinfectant, like secrets wiped clean but never forgotten. I sat in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, the USB drive resting in my pocket like a ticking clock. Around me, the buzz of fluorescent lights hummed above the whispers of reporters and the low shuffle of legal aides with overstuffed briefcases. The rain from last night still clung to the windows, casting streaks of gray across the walls. Torin hadn't arrived yet, but his lawyer had. Sleek, polished, and perfectly timed, he walked by me with a smirk, the same one Torin wore like a mask. I adjusted my jacket and stared at the door ahead. "You're not the scared kid anymore," I told myself. But my hands betrayed me, fingers tapping a staccato rhythm against the bench, knuckles stiff. The bailiff opened the doors. "Creed versus Vance. Courtroom is now in session." I stepped inside. The courtroom wasn't large, but it felt cavernous. The judge's bench loomed beneath the seal of the state, a single brass lamp casting sharp light over the oak. Judge Maris Holt entered with practiced indifference, robe swishing behind her, glasses already sliding halfway down her nose. I stood instinctively. So did Torin, who had just arrived. He looked pristine. Crisp gray suit, blue tie. That smug calm he used to wear at family dinners, back when he'd whisper to Dad just loud enough for me to hear, "She's not ready for this." We took our places, me at the petitioner's table, flanked by a public attorney I'd barely met. Torin and his legal bulldog sat opposite. Judge Holt wasted no time. "We're here today to review the matter of estate fraud, contested will, and the character defamation case filed against Ms. Vance. Counselor Creed, you may begin."
Torin's lawyer stood. Your Honor, what we have here is a textbook case of fabricated identity. My client has provided the court with extensive documentation showing Ms. Vance falsified military records, misrepresented her claim to the Vance estate, and attempted to access restricted family assets under false pretenses. He slid a folder across the table. Included in this file are falsified Navy records, a notarized disownment letter from Mr. Thomas Vance, and supporting affidavits from family members attesting to Ms. Vance's estrangement. I sat frozen. Every word was a knife aimed at a different part of me. The courtroom blurred slightly, then snapped back into focus as the judge turned toward me. Ms. Vance, she said, do you have any response? I stood, heart hammering. I do, Your Honor, but it won't come from me. It'll come from this. I pulled the USB from my pocket and walked it to the clerk. The bailiff took it gingerly, like it might explode, and passed it to the judge. For the record, I said, this drive contains financial documents, donor records, and, most importantly, a second legally notarized will, all pulled from the Creed Family Foundation's internal server. Judge Holt raised an eyebrow. And how did you obtain this? I hesitated. It was provided by someone close to the estate, someone who no longer wanted to be complicit in fraud. She inserted the drive into a small laptop built into the bench. The screen lit up, casting her face in pale blue as she scrolled. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of her finger tapping the trackpad. Then she paused. Her lips parted slowly. Counselor Creed, she said to Torin's lawyer, voice sharp now. Would you care to explain this transfer of $93,000 to an offshore account labeled Alabaster under your client's sister's name? The lawyer looked stunned. I can't verify that, Your Honor. I've never seen those documents. I'm sure you haven't, she muttered, scrolling further. And this? She asked, tapping the screen. A revised will, signed by Thomas Vance, notarized in Rockport, not the town listed on the document your client submitted. She looked at Torin now. Do you have a response, Mr. Creed? Torin rose slowly, still calm, still in control. My sister's clearly fabricated these files, he said. She's desperate. The software to mock bank data is readily available. And who's to say she didn't forge the will on her own laptop? It was a bold play, and dangerous. The judge studied him, then leaned back in her chair. I'll have the files examined, she said. In the meantime, she turned toward the bailiff. Stop everyone. Lock the doors. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. What is this? Torin demanded. The judge stood. If these documents are real, then we're not just dealing with a family dispute. We're dealing with financial fraud, wire fraud, possibly identity theft. A woman at the back of the courtroom stood suddenly. Crisp blazer, government badge on her hip. Agent Elara Vance, FBI, she announced. We've been monitoring activity related to the Vance Foundation. The USB confirms several flags we've had under review. We're taking this case federal. Torin's lawyer paled. The judge turned to Torin again. Please remain seated. He didn't move. Now, she said, firmer. He sat, slowly, jaw locked. Across from me, Aunt Lisa's hands trembled in her lap. Everything had shifted, but I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. This wasn't the end. It was the moment before the storm touches down. And as Agent Vance pulled out a folder of her own, I realized the files weren't the only secret. There was still something Torin hadn't let slip, and we were about to find out what. The courtroom had gone quiet, too quiet. Even the reporters who once whispered behind their notepads now sat frozen, their pens suspended midair. The door still echoed from the judge's command, lock the doors, but it was Agent Elara Vance who now held the room. She stood at the center aisle, badge gleaming, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. We have reason to believe the Creed Foundation has been used for coordinated fraud and embezzlement. Multiple parties are implicated. My breath hitched. Torin's lawyer sputtered something, but Agent Vance didn't look at him. She was focused on the bench, where Judge Holt was still scrolling through the USB files, her expression unreadable. I clenched my fists against my sides. The truth was finally here, open, unavoidable. And Torin still hadn't said a word. Agent Vance turned toward him. Mr. Creed, are you aware of any discrepancies in your foundation's financial statements? His eyes narrowed.
No, this is a smear campaign, an ambush orchestrated by a bitter sibling. Classic Torin, controlled, calculated. He didn't even flinch. But I watched the way his fingers tightened around the table's edge. He was scared, and scared men made mistakes. Judge Holt leaned forward. According to these files, Mr. Creed, your sister's name was used in at least 5 fraudulent wire transfers. That alone carries a sentence of up to 20 years. She could have forged that, he said, his voice rising. It's all from a flash drive she claims someone handed her in the middle of the night. Agent Voss stepped closer. We've been monitoring your accounts for months, Mr. Creed. The documents on this drive match what we already pulled from encrypted sources. This isn't new to us. It's confirmation. Torin opened his mouth, closed it. Then, from the back of the courtroom, I heard something I hadn't expected. A whimper. Aunt Lysa. She stood shakily, hands pressed together like a prayer, eyes glistening with something between grief and horror. "Torin," she whispered, "tell them it's not true." He didn't answer. She stepped forward. "Please, tell me it's not true." Torin's jaw clenched. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since this all began, and said nothing. That silence broke something in her. She sank back into the pew, her face crumpling as if something inside her had collapsed completely. Agent Voss looked back to the judge. "Your Honor, given the nature of the evidence, we're requesting immediate seizure of digital assets and a protective hold on the estate until further review." Judge Holt nodded slowly. "Granted." Torin stood abruptly, knocking over his chair. "You can't do this!" The bailiff moved. So did Agent Voss. "Sit down, Mr. Creed," she said, voice cold steel. But Torin didn't move. He was calculating again, measuring exits, figuring odds. His shoulders squared, his chest rose with a deep breath. And then his lawyer turned on him. "Torin, sit down. You're making it worse." The room felt like it shifted, a fault line splitting beneath our feet. Torin scoffed and slowly sat back down, hands raised slightly as if to say, "Fine. You want a show? Watch me." Judge Holt's gavel struck once. "This hearing is adjourned until the federal case is established. Agents, escort Mr. Creed from the premises for detainment and formal questioning." Agent Voss nodded to 2 officers at the rear. They moved in sync, stepping up to flank him. Torin didn't resist. But as he passed my table, he stopped. For the first time that day, he looked at me directly, not smug, not smirking, just calm. "You have no idea what you've started," he said. His voice was low, almost soft, but it made my skin crawl. He turned, walked out with the agents, and the courtroom, like a shaken snow globe, began to settle. Judge Holt collected her papers. The audience exhaled, but I couldn't move. The weight in my chest wasn't relief. Not yet. It was something else, something colder, because Torin hadn't broken. Not truly. And when a man like him walks out quiet, it's never over. My lawyer leaned in. "You okay?" I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice. In the back of the courtroom, Aunt Lysa stared at the floor. She hadn't looked up since Torin was cuffed. I walked toward her, each step echoing more than the last. She looked up as I stopped beside her. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear it, Elara." I didn't speak, because I believed her, but I also knew she'd looked away when it mattered most. She reached out like she might touch my arm. I stepped back. There wasn't anger in me, just distance. "I have to go," I said. I turned and left. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky hadn't cleared, but the air felt different. Lighter. Like something that had been rotting for years had finally cracked open. I walked down the courthouse steps slowly, the crowd of press and onlookers shifting as I passed. Jorah was waiting by the sidewalk. His eyes found mine. I nodded once. It was done. Or at least it had started. He opened his mouth, hesitated. "There's something else. Something in the USB. I didn't catch it before." My blood went cold. "What is it?" "There's a second will." I froze. "A what?" He pulled out a printout, hidden in a locked folder. "I cracked it after you left for court." My heart thudded. "It contradicts the first," he said. "And if it's real, it changes everything." I didn't go back inside right away.
After Jorah handed me the printout about the second will, I just stood there on the courthouse steps, watching the wind push clouds across a pale Maine sky. The kind of sky that feels like it can't decide whether it's clearing or collapsing. My fingers clutched the paper too tightly. Creases ran through Dad's signature. "You sure it's legit?" I finally asked. Jorah nodded. Quiet. It was hidden in an encrypted folder, time-stamped before the one we showed in court. "And it contradicts everything?" "Not everything," he said, "but he split the estate differently. Gave a large share to someone named Sylvia Markham." The name hit like a slap, sharp out of nowhere. I hadn't heard it in years. She used to be our nanny," I murmured. "Left when I was 10. Torin hated her." "She's also listed as a silent board member on the foundation," Jorah added, "since 2008. I looked up at him. "You're telling me Torin's been laundering money through someone he once tried to get fired?" Jorah shrugged. "Or using her as a front? Or she's using him? Either way, it complicates things." Complicated didn't begin to cover it. I tucked the paper into my coat and turned toward home, legs moving before my mind caught up. I needed space, silence, something soft to land on. But when I got back to the estate, the silence didn't soothe me. It rang, loud. The old floorboards groaned beneath my feet as I walked past the living room, Dad's chair still angled toward the window. Empty. The fireplace still unused. Upstairs, I stepped into my old bedroom. It still smelled faintly of sea salt and lavender, like time had pressed pause here, waiting for a version of me that didn't exist anymore. I collapsed onto the bed, shoes still on, jacket still zipped. My eyes burned, but the tears didn't come. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and let my breath slow. Let the questions roll in. Why hide the second will? Why leave Sylvia a share? Why bury everything right before dying? The house answered with nothing but creaks and cold. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked to Dad's study around 3 a.m., barefoot on cold floors, heart hollow and heavy. The desk lamp cast a warm, familiar glow. I pulled open drawers, not looking for answers, just connection. Old paperweights, an envelope of dry pens, a single cufflink. Then, taped to the underside of the bottom drawer, I found something. A letter, folded once, yellowed at the edges. My name written in my father's hand. My breath caught. I sat there for a long time before I opened it, afraid of what he might say, afraid he'd say nothing. But he had. "Elara, if you're reading this, I didn't get to say goodbye properly. Maybe I was too proud. Maybe I just ran out of time. I've made mistakes. Trusting Torin was one of them, but losing you was the worst. You were always the one with courage. You saw truth even when it hurt." Torin's rage started early. Jealousy, too. I tried to fix it, to make him feel seen, but in doing so, I blinded myself to what he became. The first will, it was true. But the second? I signed it in fear, out of pressure. I let him talk me into balancing things. But know this, my love, my trust, my legacy, none of it belonged to him. It's yours. Forgive where you can, but never forget who you are. Dad. I read it twice, then 3 times. My hands shook, my throat tightened, but the tears still didn't come, because love and regret don't cancel each other out. They just live side by side. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my pocket. Then I sat back, staring out the window as the sky turned blue with morning. It was strange, the quiet after truth, like standing in the wreckage and waiting to feel whole again. But I didn't feel whole, not yet. Later that day, Jorah came by. I was sitting on the porch, sipping black coffee, still in yesterday's clothes. He handed me another file. "FBI's done reviewing the USB," he said. "They want you back in court, tomorrow." I nodded. "They're also digging into Sylvia." I stiffened. "She hasn't been seen since the hearing," he added. "Of course not." I looked out at the sea. The tide was high. Waves crashed harder than usual. "There's still something missing," I said. "What do you mean?" I glanced back at him. "Dad mentioned pressure. What if Torin wasn't acting alone? What if someone else orchestrated the second will?" Jorah's silence said he'd been wondering the same. We sat in silence a moment longer before he spoke again. "There's one more thing. Judge Holt requested a private meeting." "When?" "In an hour." My stomach dropped. "Why?" "She didn't say, but she looked concerned." I stood, spine straightening.
Something was coming, something big, and I was finally ready for it. The judge's chambers were colder than I remembered. A wall of windows let in a bruised sky, flat gray like breath held too long. Judge Holt sat behind her desk, fingers steepled, reading glasses pushed to the end of her nose. She didn't speak right away, just studied me, like I was an equation with too many variables. Finally, she gestured to the seat across from her. "Close the door behind you." I did. She reached into a file and pulled out a slim envelope, cream-colored, a little worn at the edges. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting. I froze. "Where did you get that?" My voice came out thinner than I wanted. "It was filed anonymously through the court clerk last night. No fingerprints, no security footage, just appeared." She slid it across the desk. I didn't touch it. "Is it real?" I asked. "You'd know better than I would," she replied. The paper felt like it pulsed in my hand as I picked it up, like it carried weight far beyond its size. I broke the seal slowly. The letter inside was dated 3 days before Dad died. "Elara, if Torin finds this before you do, I'm sorry, but I had to try. I didn't tell you everything. There was a second will, yes, but not by my full choice. Torin wasn't working alone. Someone came to me, pressured me, said if I didn't shift the estate, they'd ruin you, that they'd already started. I tried to buy you time, to shield you. The name you need to find is Sylvia Markham. She knew things she shouldn't. And the things she didn't know, she made up. Follow the money, but more than that, follow the silence. Love always, Dad." I stared at the page, every line a blade cutting open a new truth. My stomach twisted. Sylvia wasn't just a name in the will. She was the engine behind it. Judge Holt didn't interrupt. When I finally looked up, she said, "We've opened a quiet investigation into Sylvia, but she's gone dark. No digital footprint, no property transactions, nothing." "She's still out there," I said, voice low, "and she's still pulling strings." The judge nodded. "We're not done. Neither are you." Later that night, I drove to the coast, out past the old marina, past the cliffs where Dad used to take me to fish. The sea was restless, high tide breaking against the rocks in rhythmic fury. I parked near the old signal tower and let the wind hit me hard. My coat flapped, my hair whipped across my face, and still it wasn't enough to quiet the noise inside me. I thought about that summer when I was 8. Dad carrying me on his shoulders up the lighthouse trail, telling me, no matter how dark the ocean gets, light cuts through, always. But the darkness I was in now wasn't water. It was deeper, and it was personal. Sylvia had embedded herself in our family like a ghost, silent, invisible, and corrosive. I remembered flashes, her whispering to Torin in the kitchen, the way she always seemed to be around when Dad was weakest, the way she disappeared without explanation. What else was I too young to see? When I got home, I opened the final folder on the USB I hadn't dared click before, labeled Personal. It asked for a passphrase. I sat for a long moment thinking. Then I typed, "Follow the silence." The folder unlocked. Inside, photos, dozens of scanned receipts, email threads, property ledgers, and a photo of Sylvia, standing beside someone I didn't recognize. I zoomed in. The other woman wore a courthouse badge. My skin prickled. I flipped through more files, land deeds, offshore withdrawals, and one letter marked confidential, not to be opened without legal counsel. I opened it anyway. It was an agreement, Sylvia Markham, Torin Creed, and a third signature, the notary who had filed the false will. I exhaled, slow and shaky. They were all in on it, but then something else caught my eye. At the very bottom of the document, in smaller print, if questioned, Sylvia is to cite the Cancer Treatment Incentive Fund as the origin of funds. That didn't make sense. We never had a cancer treatment fund. Dad had cancer. He never asked for money, never wanted help. The realization dropped like ice in my chest. They'd used his diagnosis, exploited it to cover financial movement. They didn't just forge documents. They used his dying to steal. I couldn't breathe. The rage came fast this time, raw, sudden. I slammed the laptop shut and pressed my fists against my eyes. They had hollowed out everything sacred. My service, his foundation, his illness. The betrayal had no bottom, and I wasn't just going to expose it. I was going to end it. That's when my phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. "You're close, but not close enough. Careful where you aim. People bleed. The sun came up slow that morning, stretching gold over the jagged Maine coastline like it was apologizing for the storm. I sat on the porch of the old estate, legs tucked beneath me, Dad's last letter folded in my pocket, still warm from the hours I'd kept it pressed against my chest. The sea was calm now, but I wasn't. Inside, my laptop was still open. Sylvia's face paused mid-frame. I hadn't slept. Just combed through every file, every name, every forged date, the fake cancer fund, the secret properties, the fabricated committee she and Torin built around Dad's name, hollowing it out from the inside. And now there was nothing left for them to hide behind. The courthouse was quiet when I returned. I found Judge Holt waiting in her chambers, Agent Voss beside her. "Are you ready?" the judge asked. I nodded. We reconvened in private session, just the three of us. Agent Voss spread the final documents across the table. "We've verified everything," she said. "The second will was coerced. The offshore accounts lead to Sylvia. And Torin, well, he's officially flipped." That stopped me cold. "He what?" "Turned on her," Voss said. "Offered testimony in exchange for reduced sentencing. Claimed she blackmailed your father, threatened to expose you unless the will was changed." I swallowed hard. "So he's throwing her under the bus?" "He's trying to save himself," the judge said. "But he's still responsible." I leaned back, pulse steady. Torin hadn't done it all alone, but he'd let it happen. That's what made it worse. Voss placed a final file in front of me. "You want to press charges against Sylvia personally?" I looked down at the name, Sylvia Markham. Once the woman who tucked me into bed, whispered bedtime stories, gave me my first book. Now, a ghost of who she pretended to be. "I don't need revenge," I said. "I need peace." Voss nodded slowly. "We'll proceed." It was over. Not in a dramatic final act, not with sirens or screams, just a quiet closing of a file. I walked out of the courthouse with Jorah beside me. The wind lifted my coat. The air felt sharper, clearer. He nudged me gently. "You okay?" "I will be." Back at the estate, I did something I hadn't been able to do for months. I opened every window, let the salt air flood the rooms, let the ghosts out. In the backyard, I knelt in the garden Dad had started and never finished. The soil was dry, but the roots were still there. I pressed my fingers into the earth and began to dig. One by one, I planted marigolds, his favorite. They stood like small suns in the dirt, quiet declarations that life would grow again here. Jorah brought out a thermos of coffee. We sat side by side on the porch, mugs in hand. "I was scared you'd leave again," he said. I shook my head. "Not this time." He reached into his coat, pulled out something wrapped in faded cloth. "What's that?" "Something I kept," he said, "from the day you left for the Navy." I unwrapped it. Dad's compass, still scratched, still functional, still pointing north. I smiled, soft and tired. "Guess I finally come home." We watched the tide roll in and out for a while, the sky softening into dusk. And I realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. That fear of being erased, of not being enough, was gone, because I had already survived it. And the truth is this: families break, people betray. But we choose what to carry and what to lay down. Dad once told me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. I used to think he meant forgiving them. Now I know. He meant forgiving myself. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, like, and leave a comment about what part hit hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't miss the next story. It's one you won't forget.